Hi, and welcome to another edition of News, Views and Ideas. This week, I'll be commenting on Copenhagen, and in your say, as you know, it's been a big couple of weeks in Federal Parliament, so I'll be responding to some of the ideas and initiatives that you've raised with me. Many of you will be aware the Copenhagen Climate Change Summit is now taking place. And I'm sure that our Prime Minister, Mr Rudd, and the 100 or so other Australians that are there, allegedly representing our national interest, will return next week hailing it as a great success. But I think Copenhagen's destined to be a failure. And I think that because the climate change alarmists need a global binding agreement in order for Copenhagen to be deemed a success. And that's not going to happen. The very best they can hope for is to have targets. And targets aren't worth the paper they're printed on because countries can ignore them at will. Already in Copenhagen, we've seen the delegates from developing nations walk out of the negotiation process because there wasn't enough cash compensation put on the table. We've seen that great myth maker, Al Gore, further exposed as a climate change alarmist by misrepresenting some of the science attached to climate change. And we've seen our own Prime Minister accused of having his rhetoric not match his action. Copenhagen will be a failure. But when Mr Rudd and his team return and say that it's been a great success and it's been in Australia's national interest, I think we're right to examine the detail. This is the same Prime Minister who only 2 weeks ago claimed that implementing a $120 billion tax with no environmental benefit was in Australia's national interest too. We caught him on that one, so let's see what he returns with from Copenhagen. To me, Copenhagen is no longer about the climate. Copenhagen is about cash, it is about compensation, and it is about the redistribution of wealth. Ultimately, that wealth comes from taxpayers like you and me. I've received loads of emails about what's been happening in the Federal Parliament and what's been happening in the Liberal Party over the last couple of weeks. Suffice to say, we have a new leader, and Tony Abbott is a man of great integrity, great strength, and great vision. Important qualities in our leadership team. Tony's appointed me as his Parliamentary Secretary, and I've also got responsibility for infrastructure and for population policy as a Parliamentary Secretary. 3 very important areas which I'll enjoy working on. In your say this week, I've received an email from Ben, and Ben's asked what can we do to further discuss nuclear energy as a potential energy source in Australia's future. Well Ben, I happen to agree with you. We should be discussing nuclear energy. We need to have a rational debate about it because as opposition to coal-fired power stations increase, we need something to replace baseload energy requirements. Nuclear needs to be considered as part of the mix. Saffron's emailed me and asked about immigration. I've talked about immigration before, but immigration needs to be considered as part of a population policy. We cannot continue to add a city the size of Sydney every 10 years to our nation without considering the impact on infrastructure, on water, on power, on housing, and a host of other services. That's what I'll be pursuing as part of my policy, and Saffron, I'll be keeping you informed. Well, thanks for watching this week's edition of News, Views and Ideas. Please keep your comments coming in so that I can respond to them on your say. You can also leave them on my website at www.corybernardi.com. The final word this week goes to our resident cartoonist, Zeg. See you next week.